I want to start today by having you just picture a calendar.
Okay, calendar.
Yeah, just your standard wall calendar. Usually it's just a grid of numbers, random days, random events.
Right, totally disconnected.
Exactly. But sometimes you get a data set that is so statistically strange, it stops looking like a calendar and starts looking like a pattern.
Yeah, it becomes something else entirely.
Right. And we are looking at one specific date today, February 21.
It is an anomaly, to say the least. When you look at the source material we have for this deep dive, specifically the piece titled February 21, A Frequency of Black Liberation, you realize pretty quickly we aren't just talking about a shared birthday here or there.
No, not at all.
We are looking at a single date that serves as a massive convergence point. Assassinations, births, microphones, legislative chambers, it all lands on this one winter day.
Yeah, and we're talking about four absolute titans here. Malcolm X, Nina Simone, Barbara Jordan, and John Lewis.
The lineup is staggering.
It really is. And the source material actually calls this date a permanent frequency in history. But, before we get too esoteric or mystical about this, what is the actual mission of looking at this today? I mean, are we just admiring a historical coincidence, or is there a utility to analyzing this specific date?
Oh, there is a distinct utility.
Mm.
The mission here is to use this date to explore how voice, power, and memory intersect in the African diaspora.
Okay, break that down a bit for us.
Well, by looking at these four individuals together, the source argues we get a complete map of how social change actually operates. It's not just one lane. It ties together prophetic speech, protest music, and institutional power. February 21 gives us a perfect crossroad to look at all of that at once.
Okay, so let's test that theory out. We have to start with the event that usually defines this date in the public consciousness.
The tragedy.
Right. February 21st, 1965, the assassination of Malcolm X.
Yeah.
Most people know the headline. It's the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem, New York. He is beginning a speech for the Organization of Afro-American Unity, and he's gunned down.
In front of his wife and children, which adds such a horrific layer to it.
Absolutely. And just to be clear, on the historical record, the source does note that 3 gunmen were arrested and convicted for this. Though it also points out there is continuing debate regarding the full truth and whether there is state involvement or negligence.
Right. The source is very careful to impartially lay out that the debate around the assassination itself is still very much alive today.
We're not taking a stance on those theories, but we are looking at his mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Because the source suggests that focusing only on the who or the how of his death really misses the why. Why is his specific evolution at that moment so crucial?
Because the Malcolm X, who walked onto that stage on February 21st, 1965, was not the exact same man the public often remembers from the early 60s.
He had evolved.
Massively. The source traces his journey from Malcolm Little to a Nation of Islam minister and finally into a global Pan-African thinker. He had performed the Hajj to Mecca.
Which fundamentally shifted his perspective.
Exactly. It softened his views on race being an absolute barrier, but it really sharpened his views on economics and imperialism.
That's a distinction that I feel often gets lost in pop culture. People freeze him in time as the Nation of Islam minister. But the source emphasizes a shift from civil rights to human rights.
Yes.
Which kind of sounds like just wordplay. Is it semantic?
No, it is definitely not wordplay. It's a completely different jurisdictional strategy. Think about it. Civil rights is a domestic issue. You are asking your own government to treat you fairly under its laws.
You're appealing to America's conscience.
Right. And Malcolm realized that was a closed loop. If the government is the entity oppressing you, appealing to them is inherently limited.
So human rights takes the issue where?
To the United Nations. To the world stage. He was reorienting black politics towards self-determination. He wanted to charge the United States with human rights violations on an international level.
He's internationalizing the struggle.
Exactly. He was linking the fight of black Americans with anti-colonial movements happening in Africa and Asia. The source calls this connecting to a global anti-imperial horizon.
Which obviously makes him a much bigger threat to the geopolitical status quo than someone just trying to change a local ordinance.
Precisely. And that specific global pivot had a huge chain connection. His death on this date linked those earlier racial justice struggles to later radical formations.
Like the Black Panthers.
Exactly. The Panthers and later prison abolitionists. They viewed black liberation as part of a worldwide fight against empire, and they got that framework from Malcolm X.
So when he is silenced on that stage, it's not just a leader dying, it's an entire global strategy being disrupted.
Right. He represented the radical outsider demanding a completely new system.
Which brings us to the second figure on this frequency, because if Malcolm was the political radical operating outside the accepted system, this next person was the cultural radical, and she was born on this exact same date,
February 21.
back in 1933, in Tryon, North Carolina. Eunice Kathleen Wayman.
Who the world knows as Nina Simone.
Right. Now, I think everyone listening probably knows her voice. It's distinct, it carries so much weight. But the source material digs into her background, and it completely contradicts the typical jazz singer narrative we might have.
It really does. She didn't come up through the church choir pipeline in the same way someone like Aretha Franklin did.
Right.
She was a classical piano prodigy. She trained on Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms.
Yeah.
Her whole goal was to be the first black female concert pianist in America.
So the club singing, the jazz, the stage name, that was all a plan B.
It was a survival strategy. She was famously rejected from the Curtis Institute of Music, which she always attributed to her race. So she turned to playing in clubs just to pay for her ongoing classical lessons, and she had to sing to keep the gigs.
But that rejection fueled a fire that ended up reshaping modern music. The source uses the phrase sonic dimension to describe her role on this February 21 frequency. How exactly does a classical background turn you into a civil rights icon?
It allowed her to weaponize the music. She made art a weapon. Take a song like Mississippi Goddamn.
Oh, yeah.
Lyrically, it is absolute venom about the murder of civil rights workers and the incredibly slow pace of justice. But musically, it's upbeat. It sounds almost like a show tune. And it has this incredibly rigid classical structure underneath the improvisation.
It's counterpoint. She's using the structure of Western classical music to absolutely skewer Western society.
Exactly. The source describes her catalog as this blend of jazz, blues, classical, folk, and soul. And her performance style blurred the lines between a formal concert hall, a church, and a political mass meeting. She wasn't just entertaining people.
She was confronting them. That feels like a really key difference. There were plenty of artists in that era who supported the movement from the sidelines.
Oh, for sure.
But Nina Simone seems entirely different.
She was the artist as an outspoken agitator. If Malcolm X provided the intellectual and political framework for Black Power, Nina Simone provided the soundtrack. But it wasn't background music. The source analyzes her role in this chain by showing how she anchored the sonic dimension. She carried the old spirituals and work songs into explicitly political, modern black music.
Which influenced huge genres later on, right? Like hip-hop and neo-soul.
Absolutely. The DNA of her confrontation is in all of that.
So if we pause and look at this date, February 21, so far you have the radical outsider in Malcolm, and you have the cultural agitator in Nina. Both of them are operating outside the accepted institutional channels of power.
Right. They are the external pressure.
But the next two figures on this frequency, they take us right into the belly of the beast. They move the chain from the outside to the inside.
They really do.
Yeah.
And that's why this date is such a perfect diagnostic tool. It covers the entire spectrum. So let's talk about the voice of the Constitution, Barbara Jordan.
Born February 21st, 1936 in Houston, Texas.
In Houston's working-class Fifth Ward.
This is a name that I feel might have faded just a bit for some younger generations compared to Malcolm or Nina. But when you look at her trajectory from a nationally recognized lawyer and orator to the Texas legislature and eventually to the U.S. House of Representatives, her resume is staggering.
She is the definition of a barrier breaker. The source highlights the immense significance of her election. She was the first black woman from a southern state elected to Congress.
And we really have to pause on the from a southern state part.
Yes, because since Reconstruction ended, no black woman from the former Confederacy had sat in Congress. We are talking about nearly a century of institutional silence. She broke that.
Wow.
But what makes her fit this frequency isn't just that she won an election. It's what she did with the Constitution once she got into that chamber.
You're referring to her defining moment, the Watergate hearings.
Exactly. It's 1974. The House Judiciary Committee is deciding whether to impeach President Nixon. The country is in a massive constitutional crisis. And Barbara Jordan delivers an opening statement that the source describes as a defining defense of constitutional democracy.
I actually have a bit of that quote here from the source. She says, "My faith in the Constitution is whole, it is complete, it is total." Now, just playing devil's advocate for a second. Coming from a black woman in 1974, isn't that a naive statement? This is a document that originally encoded her ancestors on freedom.
It sounds naive if you read it superficially, but the source argues it was actually a deeply radical act of claiming ownership.
How so?
Because she acknowledges in that same speech that when the document was written, we the people did not include her. But she refuses to let that stop her from using it. She effectively says, I am here now, and I am going to force this document to live up to its own promise.
That's incredible. So she's using the very text of the Constitution to hold the most powerful man on earth accountable.
Precisely. If Malcolm X is arguing that the system is broken and we need a new global framework, Barbara Jordan is arguing that the system's own rules, if applied rigorously, can deliver justice.
Right.
This section of the source illustrates how descendants of the enslaved began to reshape the institutions themselves. She represents formal institutional power.
It's the transition from protest to governance. She shows that you can wield profound power while wearing a suit and sitting behind a committee desk.
Which leads us perfectly to the final figure on this date, someone who seemingly bridged both of those worlds. He started outside, facing absolute brutality, and ended up inside, drafting the laws.
The final February 21 birth, John Lewis, born in 1940.
Near Troy, Alabama, to sharecropper parents in the rural South.
Talk about humble origins. But he quickly rises as a leading student activist, and I think it's important to clarify the specific organization he led, SNCC.
Yes, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was the chair of SNCC and one of the big six leaders of the Civil Rights Movement.
Which is a crucial distinction, because SNCC was often the younger, more aggressive, direct action wing compared to other groups. They were the ones on the absolute front lines.
They were. The source details his role in helping organize the March on Washington, but really focuses on his activism in Selma.
Bloody Sunday.
Exactly. We hear the phrase good trouble a lot today. It's his philosophy.
Yeah, it's on T-shirts now.
Right, but back then, championing nonviolence and good trouble meant putting your physical body in the gears of a violent machine. He didn't just give speeches. He led that march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and was brutally beaten by state troopers.
He suffered a skull fracture. That image, that reality, it ties back into the martyrdom aspect of this frequency, similar to Malcolm X.
Or does it?
But the critical difference is John Lewis survived.
He survived, and that is his unique, lasting contribution to this chain. He stayed in the fight for decades. He transitioned into decades of service in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Taking that energy from the streets into the halls of Congress?
Exactly. The source analyzes how Lewis ties youth-led direct action directly to long-term legislative struggle. He champions voting rights from the outside, getting beaten for it, and then he goes inside to help write and protect federal voting rights laws.
The source describes it as a chain running from lunch counter sit-ins to federal voting rights protection.
Yes. He is the bridge. He validates Barbara Jordan's institutional approach, but he comes at it with the direct action credibility of the protest movements.
Okay, so let's look at the full synthesis of this now, because the source really wants to connect the dots here. We have four massive figures, all anchored to February 21. Malcolm X, the radical advocating self-determination; Nina Simone, the artist providing the cultural expression; Barbara Jordan, the lawyer mounting the constitutional defense; and John Lewis, the activist bridging protest and legislation.
Right.
When you look at all of that together, what is the ultimate takeaway? Why does this specific frequency matter?
It matters because it shows us the full spectrum of liberation. The source's main argument is that February 21 ties together these assassinations and births to tell the complete story of the struggle for Black freedom.
It's an ecosystem.
Exactly. Often we get trapped in these binary debates. Should we protest in the streets or should we vote? Should we focus on art and culture or should we focus on policy?
And this date argues that you need all of it.
You need all of it. If you remove any single one of those pillars, the entire structure of the movement weakens.
Let's actually play that out for a second. If you only have Malcolm X,
Then you have incredible vision, radical solidarity, but you might lack the legislative permanence to make those changes stick over generations.
and if you only have Barbara Jordan,
You have the mastery of the law, but without the external pressure from the streets, without the John Lewises and the Nina Simones, forcing the issue institutions rarely reform themselves. The law just stagnates.
right, and if you only have Nina Simone,
You have the soul and the cultural awareness, but a song alone doesn't change a voting district.
so this frequency is showing us that progress really requires a symphony. Different voices playing completely different parts. Sometimes they're in harmony, and sometimes they're in complete dissonance, right? I mean, Malcolm X and John Lewis did not agree on tactics in the early days.
Not at all. Malcolm heavily critiqued the nonviolent approach. But looking back at this historical chain, we see how both were absolutely necessary. It's not just isolated biographies, it's a relay race.
A relay race is a great way to put it. So, just to do a quick recap for everyone listening, we looked at four figures anchored to one date: the orator in Malcolm, the artist in Nina, the lawyer in Barbara, and the activist in Jean.
The complete spectrum.
Yeah, and I think the real relevance here for you listening is to start looking at dates and history not just as these isolated random events, but as connected threads, chains of influence that build on each other.
It totally changes how you read a calendar.
It does. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own, something that builds on what we've talked about today. We often debate the nature of coincidence versus destiny. Is it really just a statistical anomaly that the prophet, the priestess, the patriot, and the protester all converge on this single winter day? Or does the struggle for freedom have its own internal rhythm, its own inevitable cadence, and it's just up to us to actually tune into it?
That is the question. And if it does have a rhythm, February 21 is definitely the downbeat.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us today. We'll see you on the next one.